Welcome to Revenge Oath. Tonight, we descend into the heart of the royal vault, where a breach no one dares speak of threatens the crown itself. Gold untouched, seals unbroken, yet something priceless is missing, drawing Sherlock Holmes into the most dangerous secret of Victorian England. Your comments are very important to me. Tell me where you're watching from today. Now let us follow Holmes as he unlocks the truth hidden behind iron doors and royal silence. The winter of 1894 had settled upon London with a peculiar severity. A dense fog, yellow and acrid, clung to the streets of the great metropolis like a shroud, muffling the clatter of hansom cabs and the cries of street vendors. It was on such an evening, the 3rd of December, that I found myself once again in the comfortable sitting room at 221 B. Baker Street, till observing my friend Sherlock Holmes as he conducted one of his curious chemical experiments. The air was thick with the pungent odour of some noxious compound, and I had thrown open the window despite the chill, preferring the damp fog to the suffocating atmosphere within. Holmes, hunched over his bench with the intensity of a medieval alchemist, seemed entirely oblivious to both the cold and my discomfort. "Holmes," I ventured, setting aside the evening edition of the Times. "Surely you might conduct these experiments at a more reasonable hour. Mrs. Hudson will have our heads if this stench permeates the entire building." He did not look up from his work. "The decomposition rate of certain organic compounds, Watson, does not arrange itself according to Mrs. Hudson's convenience or your delicate sensibilities, or this particular solution must be observed at precisely this temperature and humidity, conditions which, I might add, are only achievable on such an evening as this." I was about to protest when the bell rang below, followed by the sound of urgent footsteps upon the stairs. Mrs. Hudson appeared at our door, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a gentleman here from the Home Office. He says it's a matter of the utmost urgency and concerns the Crown itself." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar light I had come to recognize as the harbinger of an interesting case. He carefully set down his beaker and stripped off his stained apron. "Show him up at once, Mrs. Hudson. Watson, if you would be so kind as to close that window, we cannot have matters of state discussed in a draught." A moment later, a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s entered our chambers. He wore an immaculately tailored black coat, and his bearing spoke of military training and aristocratic breeding. His face, however, was drawn with worry, and his eyes darted about the room with barely concealed anxiety. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I am he," Holmes replied, gesturing to the basket chair opposite his own. "And this is my colleague, Dr. John Watson, whose discretion is absolute. You are Sir Reginald Blackwood, Permanent Under-Secretary at the Home Office, late of the Coldstream Guards, recently returned from a holiday in the Scottish Highlands, and currently residing at your club rather than your Belgravia residence. Please sit down and tell me what brings you here at such an hour." Sir Reginald stared at Holmes with undisguised astonishment, sinking slowly into the proffered chair. "How in God's name?" Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "Elementary observation, Sir Reginald. The particular cut of your coat and the rosette in your buttonhole identify your position and regiment. The faint smell of heather clinging to your travel bag, which you have brought with you, suggesting you came here directly from the train station, combined with the Highland thistlepin on your watch chain, indicate your recent location. As for your domestic arrangements, the ring on your finger shows you are married, yet you carry the distinctive smell of the Marlborough Club's particular tobacco blend, which permeates your clothing in a way that suggests residence rather than mere visitation. A man of your station would only stay at his club rather than go home to his wife under circumstances of some domestic difficulty, or, more likely, given your presence here, because you fear bringing danger to your household." Our visitor's face had gone pale. "My God, Holmes, everything you say is correct. But how did you know about the danger?" "Because," Holmes said, leaning back and steepling his fingers, "a man does not come to me at 9 o'clock on a fog-bound evening, bypassing Scotland Yard entirely, unless the matter is both sensitive and threatening. Now, sir, I suggest you tell us everything. Watson, you might want to have your notebook ready." Sir Reginald drew a deep breath and began his extraordinary tale. 3 days ago, on the evening of December the 1st, a theft occurred that has sent shock waves through the highest levels of government. The item stolen is of such significance that its loss could potentially destabilize the monarchy itself. Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I noticed his fingers had tensed slightly, always a sign of intense interest. "The Royal Vault," Sir Reginald continued, "is a secure chamber beneath the Bank of England known to only a handful of individuals. It contains certain items of historical and political sensitivity, documents primarily, but also artifacts that various monarchs have deemed too dangerous or too valuable to be kept even at Buckingham Palace or Windsor. The vault has existed since the reign of George III, and in all that time it has never been breached." "Aye, until now." "What precisely was taken?" Holmes asked. Sir Reginald hesitated, clearly wrestling with the question of how much to reveal. "A sealed leather portfolio containing letters written by King Charles II to various mistresses and political figures, in themselves historical curiosities. However, among these letters is one document of a different nature entirely, a secret treaty signed in 1670 between Charles II and Louis XIV of France, the Treaty of Dover. I could not suppress a gasp. But the Treaty of Dover is well known to historians. It was a diplomatic agreement regarding—" "That," Sir Reginald interrupted, "was the public treaty. What was stolen is the secret treaty signed on the same day in which Charles II agreed to convert to Catholicism and commit England to supporting France against the Dutch, in exchange for French gold and military support should his subjects rebel against him. Only a handful of Charles's closest advisers ever knew of its existence. Its revelation would cast doubt upon the legitimacy of the Glorious Revolution, raise questions about parliamentary sovereignty, and provide ammunition to Catholic activists and Irish Republicans who could claim that England's true allegiance has been to Rome for the past 2 centuries. Holmes was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. "A potent weapon indeed," he murmured. "Tell me about the security arrangements and the circumstances of the theft." "The vault is accessible only through a single steel door, secured with 3 independent locks. The keys are held by 3 different individuals: the Governor of the Bank of England, the Home Secretary, and the Lord Chamberlain. All 3 keys must be present and used simultaneously for the door to open. There is no other entrance or exit. The chamber is surrounded by solid rock on all sides." "Who has access to the keys?" "The keys never leave their holders' possession. They are kept on chains worn around their necks at all times. Governor Pemberton, Home Secretary Lord Ashford, and Lord Chamberlain Viscount Hartley are all men of unimpeachable reputation, each having held their positions for years." "Yet the vault was opened," Holmes observed dryly. "Tell me how the theft was discovered." A routine inspection was scheduled for the morning of December the 2nd. The 3 key holders gathered at the bank at 10 o'clock sharp, as per protocol. When the vault was opened, the portfolio was immediately noticed to be missing. It had been stored in a red Morocco case on the central shelf, catalogued and verified during the previous inspection 6 months earlier. The case was gone. And the last time anyone had entered the vault before this inspection? 6 months prior, as I mentioned. The inspections occur twice yearly. Lord Ashford, Governor Pemberton, and Lord Hartley all swear that their keys have never left their person, that they have not been out of their sight for even a moment. Holmes rose and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. How many individuals knew of the existence of the secret treaty? Aside from the 3 keyholders and myself, only the Prime Minister and Her Majesty the Queen. 6 people in total. And yet 7 now know of its existence, for the thief must surely be aware of what they have stolen. Tell me, Sir Reginald, were there any signs of forced entry, any indication of how the vault was breached? None whatsoever. The lock showed no signs of tampering. The chamber itself was undisturbed except for the missing portfolio. It is as if the item simply vanished into thin air. Nothing, Holmes said with evident satisfaction, vanishes into thin air. That is a physical impossibility. What appears to be magic is merely science insufficiently understood or crime insufficiently investigated. Tell me about the interior of the vault. Describe it in precise detail. Sir Reginald closed his eyes, recalling the scene. The chamber is approximately 20 feet square. The walls are lined with oak shelving containing various items, documents, jewellery, artifacts. The floor is solid stone, as is the ceiling. There is a single electric light fixture, installed 10 years ago. No windows, no ventilation shafts, nothing but the one door. The electric light is illuminated by a cable, I presume. Yes, the wire runs through a conduit in the ceiling, connected to the bank's generating system. Interesting. And what of the 3 key holders? Where were they on the evening of December the 1st, when the theft presumably occurred? Governor Pemberton was attending a dinner at the Mansion House with 50 witnesses. Lord Ashford was at the House of Lords until midnight, debating the new Factory Act. Again, dozens of witnesses. Viscount Hartley was at the Opera, Covent Garden, in the royal box with his wife and the Duke of Somerset. All conveniently alibied, Holmes mused, almost suspiciously so. Yet if none of them could have physically committed the theft, and the door cannot be opened without all 3 keys, he trailed off, lost in thought. That is precisely the impossibility that has baffled us, Sir Reginald said. Scotland Yard has been informed that a sensitive government document is missing, but they have not been told its nature or location. Inspector Lestrade has been working on the case, but I fear he is completely at sea. The Home Secretary suggested that I consult you privately, Mr. Holmes. This matter must be handled with absolute discretion. If word were to leak that such a document even exists, let alone that it has been stolen. I understand completely, Holmes said. Watson and I will visit the vault first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I need you to provide me with complete dossiers on all 3 key holders, their finances, their associations, their habits, any information that might prove relevant. Also, I want a detailed architectural plan of the Bank of England, particularly the section containing the vault. That can be arranged, Sir Reginald said, rising to his feet. Relief was evident in his features. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. The nation is in your debt. The nation's debt can wait, Holmes replied with a slight smile. At present, I am more interested in the intellectual challenge. Good evening, Sir Reginald. We shall call upon you at the Home Office at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. After our visitor had departed, I turned to Holmes, who had immediately returned to his chemical apparatus, though I noticed his movements were distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. An impossible crime, Holmes, I said. How can a locked room be entered when the only keys are accounted for and their holders all have alibis? It is, indeed, a pretty problem, he replied, not looking up from his work. But I would caution you against accepting any premise as absolute until we have examined the evidence ourselves. Sir Reginald presents us with an impossibility, but impossibilities, Watson, do not exist in nature. Somewhere in this affair there is a logical solution, and it is our task to discover it. But where will you begin? Holmes finally looked up, and I saw that familiar gleam of anticipation in his eyes that always appeared when he had scented a particularly complex mystery. At the beginning, Watson, always at the beginning, we shall examine the vault, interview the keyholders, and most importantly, we shall observe what Scotland Yard has undoubtedly overlooked. Someone opened that door, or appeared to do so. The question is not whether it is possible, but rather, how was it done? And more crucially, why now? Why, after more than 200 years, has this particular document suddenly become valuable enough to risk such an elaborate theft? He turned back to his experiment, but I could see his mind was already far away, racing through possibilities and scenarios. I settled back into my chair and picked up my notebook, recording the details of Sir Reginald's visit. Outside, the fog pressed against our windows, and somewhere in the vast darkness of London, a thief possessed a secret that could shake the foundations of the British Empire. It promised to be a most remarkable case. What Part 2, The Vault Inspection. The following morning dawned cold and grey, though the oppressive fog of the previous evening had lifted somewhat. Holmes was already awake when I descended to breakfast, immaculate in his grey suit, his hawkish features alert despite the early hour. He had clearly been awake for some time, for the breakfast table was littered with documents and architectural drawings. "Ah, Watson," he said without looking up, "I trust you slept well. I took the liberty of having Mrs. Hudson prepare a hearty breakfast for you. We have a full day ahead." I poured myself coffee and examined the papers spread before Holmes. They appeared to be the architectural plans he had requested, along with several thick dossiers bound in government folders. "Sir Reginald's messenger arrived at 7 o'clock, Holmes explained. "Oh, most efficient of him. These plans are fascinating, Watson. The Bank of England is a veritable fortress, as one would expect. But look here." He pointed to a section of the blueprint showing a corridor in the sub-basement. "This is where our royal vault is located. Note the thickness of the walls, 3 feet of solid masonry on all sides. The ceiling above is the foundation of the main banking hall, reinforced with steel beams. Below, solid bedrock. The only approach is through this single corridor, which itself passes 3 separate guard stations." "Surely," I said, "that makes unauthorized access impossible." "It makes it extremely difficult," Holmes corrected. "But our thief has demonstrated that difficult is not synonymous with impossible. Now look at these dossiers. Governor Marcus Pemberton, 58 years old, unmarried with 3 grown children, has served as governor of the bank for 12 years, previously a senior partner at Rothschild's. Impeccable financial record, no debts, no scandals, lives quietly in Hampstead with his wife." He tossed that folder aside and picked up the next. "Lord Edward Ashford, the Home Secretary, 62, widower, 2 sons, both serving in the diplomatic corps. Career politician of the old school, conservative in his politics, traditional in his habits, member of the Carlton Club, attends church regularly at St. Margaret's, Westminster. Again, no obvious vulnerabilities." The third dossier was somewhat thinner. "Viscount Arthur Hartley, Lord Chamberlain, 49, married late in life 5 years ago to Lady Caroline Pembroke, daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland. Previously something of a bachelor about town, but by all accounts has settled into respectable domesticity. No children. Maintains residences in London and Gloucestershire. His finances show some strain. The estate requires upkeep, but nothing catastrophic. His wife brought a substantial dowry to the marriage. All men of position and reputation, I observed. Hardly the sort to engage in theft. And yet, Watson, theft has occurred. Someone opened that vault, and the only way to do so requires 3 keys. Therefore, at least one of these apparently respectable gentlemen is not what he seems. Or, he paused, drumming his fingers on the table. Or, I prompted, or the security system has a flaw that no one has previously discovered. Come, Watson. Or we have an appointment at the bank. We arrived at the Bank of England at precisely 9 o'clock to find Sir Reginald waiting for us at a private entrance on Lothbury. He was accompanied by a stocky man with greying side whiskers and the unmistakable bearing of a Scotland Yard detective. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Sir Reginald greeted us. "You know Inspector Lestrade, I believe?" "Indeed," Holmes said coolly. "Good morning, Lestrade. I trust you have been making progress on the case?" Lestrade's expression suggested otherwise. "I've done all that can be done, Mr. Holmes, but I'll admit this one has me stumped. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no apparent motive for any of the 3 key holders. It's as if the damned document walked out on its own legs." "Documents," Holmes observed, "rarely possess ambulatory capabilities. Or shall we examine the scene?" We were led through a labyrinth of corridors, past armed guards who snapped to attention as Sir Reginald passed. Eventually we descended a stone staircase into the sub-basement of the building. The air grew cooler and damper, and the walls here were bare stone, giving the impression of a medieval dungeon rather than a modern financial institution. At the end of a long corridor, we came to an imposing steel door. It was perhaps 7 feet high and 4 feet wide, with 3 separate keyhole mechanisms arranged vertically along its right edge. 2 guards stood at attention on either side. "The 3 keyholders have been summoned," Sir Reginald said. "They should arrive shortly." Holmes, however, was not waiting. He had produced his magnifying lens and was examining the door with minute attention, starting with the frame and working his way systematically across every inch of the surface. "No scratches around the locks," he murmured. "No file marks, no tool impressions. The steel is unblemished." He knelt down and examined the threshold where the door met the floor. "No gaps, no space for insertion of any device. The seal is complete." He stood and turned his attention to the walls flanking the door, running his hands across the stone, tapping occasionally, and listening to the sound. "Solid," he pronounced. "No hollow spaces, no hidden panels. Lestrade, I don't suppose you thought to examine the walls?" The inspector bristled slightly. "Of course I did, Mr. Holmes. I'm not a complete fool. The walls are solid stone 3 feet thick. I had workmen sound every inch of them. Nothing. And the corridor ceiling? Solid as well. The banking hall floor above us, as you noted from the plans." Holmes nodded, apparently satisfied for the moment. The sound of footsteps announced the arrival of the 3 keyholders. Governor Pemberton arrived first, a portly, dignified man with a full beard going white, dressed in a formal morning coat. He was followed closely by Lord Ashford, tall and thin with aristocratic features and cold blue eyes. Finally came Viscount Hartley, younger than the others, with dark hair and a nervous energy that manifested in quick, darting movements. "Gentlemen," Sir Reginald said, "this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, who have agreed to assist in this matter. Mr. Holmes, if you would examine the key mechanism." The 3 keyholders stepped forward, each drawing a chain from around his neck. At the end of each chain hung an ornate key, at approximately 4 inches long, each with a unique and complex bit pattern. Holmes examined each key in turn through his lens, requesting that each holder place their key in its respective lock without turning it. He noted the fit, the alignment, and then asked them to remove the keys. He produced a small metal rod and carefully inserted it into each lock, probing the mechanism. "The locks are of the Brahma pattern," he observed, "modified for this particular application. Each is functionally independent. The door cannot open unless all 3 are turned simultaneously. Ingenious and quite secure. There is no possibility of picking these locks, not with any conventional tools. The keys themselves. He examined them again. Show no signs of recent duplication. The metal is aged, the patina consistent with decades of wear. These are the original keys. I would stake my reputation on it. Then how? Viscount Hartley began, but Holmes cut him off with a raised hand. If you please, we shall now open the vault. I wish to examine the interior. The three men looked at each other, then at Sir Reginald, who nodded. They stepped forward in unison, each inserting his key into its designated lock. On my count, Governor Pemberton said. 1, 2, 3. They turned the keys simultaneously. There was a deep clunk as internal bolts withdrew, and then the massive door swung slowly inward on well-oiled hinges. Beyond lay the royal vault. It was exactly as Sir Reginald had described, a square chamber, perhaps 20 feet to a side, lined with oak shelving. The shelves held an eclectic collection of items, wooden boxes, leather portfolios, unjeweled artifacts wrapped in cloth, even what appeared to be a crown of ancient design. An electric bulb in the ceiling cast a harsh white light over everything. Holmes entered slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. He examined the floor first, dropping to his hands and knees to study the stone paving with his lens. Undisturbed dust in the corners, he noted. No unusual marks or disturbances. The stones are mortared solid, no loose blocks, no hollow spaces beneath. He stood and turned his attention to the walls, repeating his examination from outside, tapping and listening. I watched him work with admiration. His methods were always thorough, always systematic. While Lestrade and the others waited impatiently by the door, Holmes spent nearly half an hour examining every surface, every shelf, every item in the vault. The red Morocco case that held the stolen portfolio, he said, finally. Show me where it was positioned. Governor Pemberton pointed to a shelf at eye level on the far wall. Just there, Mr. Holmes. I can show you the inventory record if... That won't be necessary. Holmes examined the shelf carefully, noting the dust patterns. Yes, I can see the outline where the case rested. It was removed cleanly, not knocked over or dropped. The thief knew exactly what he was looking for. He turned his attention to the ceiling, studying the electric light fixture and the conduit through which the wire passed. This conduit, he said, pointing. How thick is it? 1.5 inches in diameter, Sir Reginald replied, just large enough for the electrical cable. And it runs where? Through the ceiling to the electrical panel in the guard room, or then to the main generators. Holmes produced his measuring tape and calculated distances, muttering to himself. He examined the light fixture itself, unscrewing the glass shade and peering at the bulb and socket. Has this fixture ever been serviced or replaced? He asked. The question caught everyone off guard. Governor Pemberton frowned in thought. Not to my knowledge. It was installed when the building was electrified in 1884. The bulbs are replaced as needed, but the fixture itself, no, I don't believe it has been touched. And who changes the bulbs? The bank's maintenance staff. I can get you their names if... Please do. I shall want to interview each of them. Holmes replaced the glass shade and returned to his examination. He studied the door from the inside, noting the bolt mechanism and the way the locks engaged. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, he stepped back and surveyed the entire chamber once more. Lestrade, he said, I don't suppose you found any fingerprints? The inspector shook his head. None that don't belong to the 3 key holders or to Sir Reginald. The thief wore gloves, presumably. Presumably, Holmes echoed, but his tone was thoughtful rather than agreeing. Tell me, gentlemen, this inspection on December the 2nd, was it scheduled in advance? Yes, Governor Pemberton said. These inspections occur on the first Monday of June and December each year. The date has been fixed in the calendar for years. So the thief would have known that he had 6 months before the theft would be discovered? Apparently so. Holmes nodded slowly. And yet he took only one item, the portfolio containing the secret treaty. Oh, he did not disturb anything else, despite the fact that this vault contains items of enormous value. That jeweled crown, for instance, medieval, if I'm not mistaken, worth a fortune to the right collector. That is the crown of Margaret of Anjou, Sir Reginald said quietly. Yes, quite valuable. Yet our thief ignored it, along with everything else, and took only a leather portfolio containing old letters. This suggests someone with a very specific purpose, not a common criminal motivated by profit. Or, Viscount Hartley suggested nervously, someone who was paid handsomely to steal that particular document. Indeed, a political motive rather than a financial one. That narrows our suspects considerably, though not enough for comfort. Holmes turned to Sir Reginald. I shall need to interview each of the 3 key holders privately. Also, I want a complete list of everyone who has known about this vault in the past year. Guards, maintenance workers, clerks who might have seen the inventory records. Someone talked, either deliberately or accidentally. Information of this sort does not simply materialize in a criminal's mind. I'll arrange the interviews for this afternoon, Sir Reginald promised. Shall we say 2 o'clock at the Home Office? That will suffice. Until then, Watson and I have some inquiries to make. Gentlemen, good morning. As we emerged from the bank into the weak winter sunlight, Lestrade hurried to catch up with us. Well, Mr. Holmes, have you solved it then? Holmes gave him an enigmatic smile. Let us say that I have eliminated several impossibilities, and am now left with what must be, however improbable, the truth. But I need more data before I can present a conclusion. Tell me, Lestrade, in your investigations, Holmes paused mid-stride on Threadneedle Street, his keen eyes fixed on Lestrade with an intensity that made the inspector shift uncomfortably. The morning traffic swirled around us, hansoms clattering past, clerks hurrying to their offices, street vendors calling out their wares, but Holmes seemed oblivious to it all. In your investigations, he repeated, did you examine the personal finances of the 3 key holders with any thoroughness? Lestrade bristled at the implication. Of course I did, Mr. Holmes. Governor Pemberton is solid as the bank itself. No debts, substantial investments, lives well within his means. Lord Ashford has a comfortable income from his estate and his government salary. As for Viscount Hartley, well, his finances are a bit tighter, what with maintaining that country house and his wife's expensive tastes, but there's nothing suspicious, no unusual deposits, no sudden wealth. And no sudden poverty? Holmes asked sharply. No unexpected expenses, no mysterious withdrawals? Nothing of the sort. I checked their banking records going back 6 months, all perfectly ordinary. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, his fingers drumming against his walking stick. What about their associations, their social circles? A man's companions often reveal more than his bank statements. All respectable, Mr. Holmes. These are pillars of society we're talking about. They move in the highest circles. The Carlton Club, the House of Lords, society dinners. There's no hint of scandal attached to any of them. Scandal, Holmes murmured, is often merely indiscretion discovered. The question is, what indiscretions remain hidden? He turned to me. Come, Watson, we have several hours before our appointments. I wish to pay a visit to Somerset House. Somerset House? I echoed, puzzled. Whatever for? The Records Office, my dear fellow. I have a theory germinating, and it requires verification. Lestrade, I suggest you make inquiries at the various gentlemen's clubs frequented by our 3 key holders. Find out who they've been dining with, what conversations might have been overheard. Gossip, Inspector, can be as valuable as evidence. Lestrade looked doubtful, but nodded. I'll do what I can, though I don't see what good it'll do. We already know they were all elsewhere when the theft occurred. Perhaps, Holmes said enigmatically. But a crime of this sophistication was not executed in a single evening, Lestrade. It required planning, preparation, and most importantly, inside knowledge. Someone provided the thief with information about that vault, and that someone may well have left traces in places you haven't thought to look. We left Lestrade standing on the pavement, his expression caught between irritation and curiosity, and hailed a cab to convey us across the city. As our hansom rattled through the crowded streets toward the Strand, I studied Holmes's profile, trying to discern the direction of his thoughts. He sat in silence, his grey eyes distant, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose of deep concentration. "Holmes," I ventured, "what exactly are we looking for at Somerset House?" He roused himself from his reverie. "Marriage records, Watson, and birth certificates, if time permits. Our Viscount Hartley married 5 years ago, somewhat late in life for a man of his station. I find myself curious about the circumstances." "Surely you don't suspect Lady Caroline of involvement? A woman of her breeding—" "I suspect everyone and no one until the facts dictate otherwise," Holmes interrupted. "But it is not Lady Caroline's character that interests me, it is her connections. The Earl of Westmoreland's daughter would have brought more than money to that marriage. She brought family alliances, social networks, access to circles that even a viscount might not naturally penetrate." "You think someone in her family is involved?" "I think nothing yet. I merely observe that Viscount Hartley's financial situation improved considerably upon his marriage, yet according to Sir Reginald's dossier, his expenses have grown proportionally. A man who lives perpetually at the edge of his means is a man vulnerable to temptation or coercion." The cab deposited us at Somerset House, that imposing edifice overlooking the Thames. Within its bureaucratic halls were stored the vital records of the realm: births, marriages, deaths, all meticulously catalogued and filed. Holmes moved through the maze of corridors with the confidence of one familiar with such institutions, and within minutes we were seated at a desk with several large ledgers before us. He worked with remarkable speed, his fingers flying through the pages, pausing occasionally to make notes in his pocketbook. I watched over his shoulder as he traced the Hartley-Pembroke marriage. She then branched outward to examine the Earl of Westmoreland's family tree. "Interesting," he murmured, after perhaps 20 minutes of silent study. "Very interesting indeed. Watson, note this. Lady Caroline's brother, the Honourable Thomas Pembroke, was expelled from Oxford in 1889 for gambling debts. He subsequently spent 2 years on the continent, Paris, then Rome. He returned to England only last year and now resides in Mayfair, apparently restored to the family's good graces. You think this brother might be involved?" "I think that a young man with expensive habits and a history of financial irresponsibility is worth investigating. Moreover," he flipped through another ledger, his eyes scanning rapidly. "Yes, here it is. Thomas Pembroke was married 6 months ago to Miss Sarah Crowley, a daughter of the late Colonel Crowley of the Bengal Lancers. The wedding was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, a society affair, well attended. Among the witnesses listed—" His finger stabbed at the page. "Governor Marcus Pemberton." I leaned closer, trying to follow his reasoning. "The governor attended the wedding of Lady Caroline's brother. Surely that's natural enough. They would move in the same circles." "Natural, yes, but also convenient." Holmes closed the ledger with a decisive snap and rose from his chair. "Come, Watson, we have one more stop before our interviews this afternoon. I wish to pay a call on the Honourable Thomas Pembroke." "Without an appointment?" "Holmes, surely." Surprise, my dear Watson, is often a detective's most valuable weapon. A man prepared for questioning has time to construct lies. A man caught unawares reveals truth through hesitation, through the flicker of an eye, through a dozen unconscious gestures that the trained observer can read like text upon a page. We took a cab to Mayfair, to a fashionable address on Charles Street. The building was one of those elegant townhouses that spoke of wealth without ostentation, the sort of residence that required substantial income to maintain. I found myself wondering how a young man recently returned from exile abroad, with a history of gambling debts, could afford such lodgings. Holmes must have been thinking along similar lines, for as we ascended the steps, he muttered, "The Earl's purse runs deep, it seems, or perhaps young Pembroke has discovered a more lucrative source of income." We were admitted by a manservant whose livery was impeccable, and his manner professionally distant. When Holmes presented his card and requested an audience with Mr. Pembroke, the servant's expression flickered with something, surprise perhaps, or was it apprehension? "I shall inquire if Mr. Pembroke is receiving visitors," he said, leaving us in a handsomely appointed drawing-room while he withdrew. The moment we were alone, Holmes was in motion. His eyes swept the room, cataloguing every detail. He examined the books on the shelves, mostly unread first editions, chosen for appearance rather than content. He noted the paintings on the walls, expensive but recently acquired, the frames too new, the placement too calculated. Everything spoke of money hastily spent to create an impression of established wealth. "A stage set," Holmes murmured. "All surface, no substance. Our Mr. Pembroke is playing a role. Aye, but the question remains, for whose benefit?" He paused before a writing desk positioned near the window. Upon it lay several letters, and though I knew it was improper, Holmes had no such compunctions. His sharp eyes scanned the visible correspondence with practised speed. Bills from tailors, invitations to society functions, a letter from— He stopped abruptly, his body tensing. "Watson, look at this!" I moved to his side. The letter was written on expensive cream-coloured paper, the handwriting elegant but forceful. It was dated 3 days prior, December the 1st, the very day of the theft. "My dear Pembroke," Holmes read quietly, "I must insist upon a meeting at your earliest convenience. The matter we discussed remains unresolved and time grows short. I shall call upon you Thursday evening at 9 o'clock. Do not fail me in this. Yours, etc." The signature was illegible, merely an elaborate flourish. "Thursday evening," I said. "That's tonight." Indeed, and note the tone, not a request but a demand. Someone has leverage over our young friend. Holmes quickly copied the letter into his notebook, then returned it to its precise position on the desk. The drawing-room door opened, and a young man entered with the casual confidence of inherited privilege. Thomas Pembroke was perhaps 30 years old, dark-haired and handsome in the manner of his class, with the slightly dissipated look of one who kept late hours and enjoyed life's pleasures without restraint. He wore a silk dressing-gown despite the afternoon hour, and his eyes carried the faint redness that suggested either lack of sleep or excess of drink, possibly both. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, or his voice carrying a note of amusement rather than concern. "Your reputation precedes you. To what do I owe the honour of this unexpected visit?" Holmes had adopted his most affable manner, the penetrating intensity of moments, before carefully masked. "Mr. Pembroke, forgive the intrusion. I am conducting inquiries into a matter of some delicacy, and your name has arisen in connection with certain individuals who may possess relevant information." "How wonderfully vague," Pembroke said, settling himself into an armchair with languid grace. "Pray be more specific. What individuals and what information?" "Your brother-in-law, Viscount Hartley, for one. I understand you are on cordial terms." A flicker of something passed across Pembroke's face. Was it wariness? "Arthur?" Yes, naturally. He married my sister. We dine together occasionally. Attend the same functions. What of it? And Governor Pemberton? You are acquainted with him as well, I believe? Now the wariness was unmistakable. Pembroke's posture shifted slightly, his shoulders tensing beneath the silk. I know the governor slightly. He was kind enough to attend my wedding. Again, Mr. Holmes, I fail to see the relevance. Holmes leaned forward, his grey eyes suddenly sharp as steel. Mr. Pembroke, I shall be frank with you. A theft has occurred involving matters of state security. The circumstances suggest inside knowledge and careful planning. You are a young man who has recently returned from an extended stay abroad, who lives well beyond what one might expect given your family allowance, and who maintains associations with individuals connected to the crime. It would be in your best interest to be forthcoming. For a long moment Pembroke stared at Holmes, and I saw genuine fear flicker in his eyes. Then, with visible effort, he mastered himself and laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. You're fishing, Mr. Holmes. You have no evidence connecting me to any crime, because I have committed none. My finances are my own affair, and, as for my associates, I know half of London society. If you're investigating everyone I've ever spoken to, you'll be busy for years. Perhaps, Holmes said softly. But I note you do not ask what was stolen, or when, or from where. An innocent man, Mr. Pembroke, would be curious about such details. A guilty man, or a man with guilty knowledge, would avoid inquiry for fear of revealing what he already knows. The colour drained from Pembroke's face. He rose abruptly, his hands clenched. I think this interview is concluded, Mr. Holmes. I must ask you to leave. Of course, Holmes said smoothly, standing. But I should mention, you are expecting a visitor tonight at 9 o'clock. Someone who has leverage over you, someone who makes demands rather than requests. Pembroke's face went from pale to ashen. His hand gripped the back of the armchair so tightly that his knuckles whitened. How did you... He caught himself, but too late. The admission was written plainly across his features. Holmes pressed his advantage. Mr. Pembroke, you are in deep waters, and sinking deeper with each moment you remain silent. If you are being coerced, if someone has compromised you in some fashion, now is the time to speak. I can offer protection, discretion, but if you persist in this deception, not when the truth emerges, as it inevitably will, you will find yourself alone and answerable for crimes you may not have even committed. For a terrible moment I thought Pembroke might break. His mouth opened, words forming on his lips, his eyes desperately searching Holmes's face as if seeking some guarantee of salvation. But then his jaw clenched, and he drew himself up with what remained of his dignity. You are mistaken, Mr. Holmes. I have no idea what you're talking about. Now please, leave my home, or I shall summon the police and have you removed for harassment. Holmes regarded him with something almost like pity. As you wish, but mark my words, Mr. Pembroke, before this day is done, you will regret your silence. Good afternoon. Once outside, Holmes's demeanour changed instantly. The affable detective vanished, replaced by the cold, or calculating mind I knew so well. He checked his watch. 1:15. We have 45 minutes before our interviews at the Home Office. That gives us just enough time. Time for what, Holmes? To set a trap, Watson. Tonight at 9 o'clock, someone will call on Thomas Pembroke, someone connected to our vault theft, I am certain of it. We shall be there to observe this meeting and, with luck, identify our conspirator. But how will we gain entry? Pembroke will surely warn his visitor if he sees us lurking about. A thin smile crossed Holmes's lips. Which is why we shall not be lurking. There is a newsagent's shop across the street from Pembroke's residence. Did you notice it? The upper floor appears to be residential. A few shillings to the proprietor should secure us a window with an excellent view of Pembroke's front entrance. We shall see who calls upon him and follow them when they depart. Holmes, this is brilliant. Elementary, Watson, but first we must attend to our official interviews. Come, we shall take a cab to Whitehall. I wish to hear what our three keyholders have to say when questioned separately. Men often reveal truths in isolation that they would conceal in company. As our cab navigated the afternoon traffic toward the government district, I found my mind racing with the implications of what we had discovered. Thomas Pembroke was clearly involved somehow, but to what degree? Was he the thief or merely an accomplice? And what was his connection to the three keyholders who alone possessed access to the royal vault? Holmes sat beside me in silence, his eyes half closed, but I knew that behind that mask of repose, his extraordinary mind was assembling pieces of a puzzle that remained frustratingly incomplete. The Home Office building rose before us, its grey stone facade austere and imposing against the winter sky. Sir Reginald met us in a private office on the third floor, a chamber furnished with the heavy mahogany and leather that seemed mandatory for government buildings. The three gentlemen are waiting in separate rooms, he informed us. I thought it best to keep them apart, as you suggested. Whom would you like to see first? Viscount Hartley, Holmes said, without hesitation. The youngest, the most financially pressed, and, I suspect, the most vulnerable to pressure. Sir Reginald nodded and departed, returning moments later with the Viscount. In the brighter light of the office, Hartley appeared even more nervous than he had at the bank that morning. His fingers played restlessly with his watch chain, and his eyes darted between Holmes and myself with barely concealed anxiety. "Please, sit down, Lord Hartley," Holmes said, his tone reassuring. "This is merely an informal conversation. I have a few questions that may help clarify certain aspects of this unfortunate affair." Hartley settled into the chair opposite, perching on its edge as if ready to flee at any moment. "Of course, Mr. Holmes. Anything I can do to help." "Excellent. Tell me, how long have you held the position of Lord Chamberlain?" 7 years this past November. "And in all that time you have kept your key secure, never lost it, never had it out of your possession?" "Never. I wear it always, even when I sleep. The responsibility weighs heavily, Mr. Holmes, but I have never been careless with it." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Your wife, Lady Caroline. She is the daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland, I believe?" A flicker of confusion crossed Hartley's face at this apparent change of subject. "Yes, that's correct. We married 5 years ago." "A happy union?" "Very happy, Mr. Holmes, though I fail to see—" "Her brother, Thomas Pembroke. You know him well?" Now the confusion was mixed with something else, discomfort, perhaps even alarm. "Thomas? Yes, naturally. He's my brother-in-law. We see each other socially." "Why do you ask about Thomas?" Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Lord Hartley, I shall be direct. Your brother-in-law maintains a lifestyle that his known income cannot support. His residence in Mayfair, his expensive habits. Where does the money come from?" Hartley's face flushed. "I resent the implication, Mr. Holmes. Thomas received a generous settlement from his father when he married. As for his expenses—" "His father, the Earl, who 5 years ago cut him off without a penny for his gambling debts and sent him abroad in disgrace?" Holmes's voice was sharp now, cutting through Hartley's protests. "That father?" The Viscount's flush deepened. "Thomas has reformed. He's made investments, had some lucky speculations." "Or he has found a patron," Holmes interrupted. "Someone willing to fund his lifestyle in exchange for certain services. Services that might involve information about the royal vault, perhaps. Information that only someone connected to a key holder might possess." Hartley half rose from his chair, his face now pale with anger or fear. I could not tell which. This is outrageous! Are you accusing my wife's brother of being involved in this theft? Or worse, suggesting that I am suggesting nothing, Lord Hartley. I am merely following the trail of evidence wherever it leads. Holmes allowed the silence to stretch, his penetrating gaze fixed upon the Viscount's agitated features. Finally, he spoke again, his tone softer, but no less intense. Lord Hartley, let me ask you something else. In the past 6 months, has your brother-in-law ever shown unusual interest in your work? Asked questions about the bank, about security procedures, about the vault itself? Hartley sank back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain from him. His hands trembled slightly as he pressed them against his knees. There may have been conversations.
Family dinners, you understand. Casual talk. What sort of casual talk? Thomas asked once, perhaps 2 months ago, about the nature of my responsibilities. He seemed curious about what exactly a Lord Chamberlain does, what access I have to various institutions. Hartley's voice had grown quiet, uncertain. I thought nothing of it at the time. Family members often ask about one's work. And what did you tell him? Very little of substance. I am not a fool, Mr. Holmes, whatever you may think. I did not discuss the vault or its contents. I merely mentioned that I serve as a custodian for certain royal properties and historical artifacts. Did you mention the three-key system? Hartley hesitated, and in that hesitation, Holmes had his answer. It was general knowledge, the Viscount said defensively.
Or anyone with connections to the government might have heard of it. The mechanism is not precisely secret, merely the location and contents of the vault itself. I see. Holmes made a note in his pocketbook. And your key, where do you keep it when you retire for the evening? Around my neck always, as I said. I have a valet who assists me with dressing, but the key never leaves the chain, and the chain never leaves my person. Your valet's name? Cornelius Morton. He's been in my service for 3 years, utterly trustworthy. Holmes nodded, though his expression suggested he placed little faith in anyone's trustworthiness at this juncture. One final question, Lord Hartley. On the evening of December the 1st, you attended the opera at Covent Garden. What performance? Verdi's Rigoletto. My wife adores Italian opera. We were in the royal box with the Duke of Somerset and his party. You remained throughout the performance? Yes, of course. Well, he paused. I stepped out briefly during the second intermission, perhaps 10 minutes. The champagne, you understand? Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. 10 minutes? And your key? Around my neck, as always, Mr. Holmes. Surely you cannot think that in 10 minutes I could have— I think nothing yet, Lord Hartley. I merely collect facts. Thank you for your time. You may go, but please remain available should I have further questions. After the Viscount had departed, looking thoroughly shaken, Sir Reginald turned to Holmes with barely concealed alarm. Good God, Holmes, do you truly suspect Hartley himself? I suspect everyone and trust no one, Holmes replied. But no, I do not believe Hartley is our thief. He is, however, the weak link in our chain, the one through whom information leaked, whether deliberately or through careless conversation. But before we proceed further, Holmes continued, rising from his chair, I believe we have sufficient evidence to bring this matter to its conclusion. Sir Reginald, I shall need you to assemble everyone involved in this case at the Bank of England at 8 o'clock this evening. Governor Pemberton, Lord Ashford, Viscount Hartley, and Inspector Lestrade. Also, I want Thomas Pembroke brought there under some pretext. Tell him it's a matter concerning his brother-in-law, if necessary. You know who did it? Sir Reginald asked, his voice rising with excitement. I know how it was done, which amounts to the same thing. The identity of the thief will become apparent once I demonstrate the method. Watson and I have one more appointment to keep before this evening's revelation. We shall see you at 8 o'clock sharp." As we departed the Home Office, I pressed Holmes for details, but he merely shook his head. "Patience, Watson. I have one final piece of the puzzle to confirm. We must return to Baker Street briefly, then keep our appointment at the newsagent's shop. If my theory is correct, tonight's visitor to Thomas Pembroke will provide the last link in our chain of evidence." The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness. Holmes spent the hours in feverish activity, sending telegrams, consulting reference books, and conducting a peculiar experiment involving wax, wire, and what appeared to be a locksmith's tools. Yet I knew better than to interrupt him during such moments of intense concentration. At 7 o'clock, we positioned ourselves in the upper room of the newsagent's shop across from Pembroke's residence. Holmes had paid the proprietor handsomely for the privilege, and we now sat in darkness by the window watching the street below. "There," Holmes whispered, as a hansom pulled up precisely at 9 o'clock. A figure emerged, heavily cloaked against the cold, and ascended the steps to Pembroke's door. The visitor was admitted immediately. "Can you make out who it is?" I asked, straining to see. "Not yet, but we shall know soon enough. They will not stay long. This is merely a transaction, not a social call. Be ready to follow when they emerge." We waited in tense silence. True to Holmes's prediction, barely 15 minutes had passed when the door opened again. The cloaked figure descended the steps and entered the waiting hansom. As the cab pulled away, Holmes was already moving. "Quickly, Watson, we must not lose them." We raced down the stairs and into the street, where Holmes's pre-arranged cab waited. "Follow that hansom," Holmes commanded, and we set off through the evening traffic. The chase led us through Mayfair, past Hyde Park, and finally to Threadneedle Street. To my astonishment, the hansom stopped directly before the Bank of England. "Extraordinary," I breathed. "Holmes, they're going to the bank." "Exactly as I anticipated," Holmes said with grim satisfaction. "Come, Watson, it is time to spring our trap." We followed at a discreet distance as the cloaked figure entered through a side entrance, clearly using a key. Holmes waited several minutes before leading me through the same door, which remained unlocked. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "To the vault, where else? Our thief is making one final visit, perhaps to retrieve something left behind, or to return the stolen document now that its purpose has been served. Either way, we shall catch them in the act." We descended the familiar stone staircase to the sub-basement, moving silently through the shadowed corridors. As we approached the vault, I could see light spilling from the open doorway. Someone had indeed unlocked the massive steel door. Holmes held up his hand, signaling me to wait. Then, with sudden swiftness, he strode forward into the vault chamber. "Good evening, Governor Pemberton," he said clearly. "I believe you have something that belongs to Her Majesty's government." I rushed forward to see Governor Marcus Pemberton standing frozen before the shelves, a red morocco case clutched in his hands. His face, normally so composed and dignified, was a mask of shock and terror. "Mr. Holmes, I can explain. This isn't what it appears." "Oh, I think it is precisely what it appears," Holmes said coldly. "You are the thief who stole the secret Treaty of Dover from this very vault, or rather, you are one of the thieves, for this crime required assistance. Shall we discuss how you accomplished this seemingly impossible feat?" Pemberton's hands trembled, the red morocco case slipping slightly in his grasp. For a moment, I thought he might attempt to flee, but Holmes had positioned himself between the governor and the only exit. The electric light cast harsh shadows across the older man's face, making him appear suddenly aged and haggard. "You're mistaken, Holmes," Pemberton said, his voice hoarse. "I came here to check on the vault's security after your investigation this morning raised concerns. I found this case, the stolen portfolio, just sitting here on the shelf. Someone must have returned it." Holmes laughed, a sharp, mirthless sound that echoed off the stone walls. "A valiant attempt, Governor, but entirely unconvincing. You see, I have spent the past hour watching Thomas Pembroke's residence. At 9 o'clock precisely, a cloaked figure visited him, a figure who then came directly here to the bank. That figure was you, Governor. I followed you every step of the way." "Nonsense. I was at home all evening." "Were you? I think not. But let us set aside your movements for the moment and discuss instead the method by which this vault was robbed. That, I confess, puzzled me considerably at first. 3 keys, 3 key holders, all with iron-clad alibis. How could the vault possibly be opened without all 3 men present?" Pemberton said nothing, but his jaw clenched tight, and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. Holmes began to pace, his voice taking on the lecturing tone I knew so well. The answer, when it finally presented itself, was elegantly simple. The vault was never opened on the night of December the 1st. It was opened much earlier, weeks earlier in fact, and the treaty was stolen then. The seemingly impossible alibi was unnecessary because the crime had already been committed. "That's absurd," Pemberton protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The vault is inspected every 6 months. If the treaty had been missing for weeks, it would have been discovered at the last inspection in June." But would it? Who conducts these inspections, Governor?" "The 3 key holders examine the inventory together." Pemberton stopped abruptly, realization dawning in his eyes. "Precisely," Holmes said with satisfaction. "The 3 key holders verify the contents. But what if one of those key holders had already removed the item in question and substituted a convincing duplicate? A red Morocco case, identical to the original, perhaps containing old letters of no particular value. During the inspection, the 3 men would see what they expected to see. A red case in its proper place. None of them would open it to examine the contents, would they? Nor that level of scrutiny is not part of the routine inspection protocol. Pemberton's shoulders sagged, but still he maintained his denial. "You're speculating wildly." "Am I? Then explain this." Holmes produced a small object from his pocket, a key, ornate and complex, identical to the one I had seen hanging from Pemberton's neck that morning. "This is a wax impression I made earlier today, based on careful measurements and observations of your key, Governor. Any competent locksmith could create a duplicate from such an impression. But here's the fascinating part. Creating this impression would require access to your key for perhaps 30 minutes. When might someone have had such access?" The colour drained from Pemberton's face. "Your valet, perhaps?" Holmes continued relentlessly. "Or someone who visited your home? But no, you're far too careful for that. The key never leaves your person. Unless—" he paused dramatically. "Unless you willingly gave it to someone you trusted. Someone like your son-in-law, perhaps? Or better yet, someone you were working with as an accomplice." "Stop," Pemberton whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, just stop." "Thomas Pembroke is your nephew by marriage," Holmes pressed on. "Viscount Hartley is your son-in-law's brother-in-law. You move in the same social circles, attend the same functions. It would have been simple enough to coordinate with young Pembroke, a man desperate for money, compromised by gambling debts, vulnerable to pressure or persuasion. You gave him access to your key long enough to make an impression. He arranged for duplicates of all 3 keys to be made, probably on the continent where such questions aren't asked. Then at some point, when all 3 key holders were conveniently occupied elsewhere, someone used those duplicate keys to open the vault and make the switch." "Who?" I interjected. "Who actually entered the vault?" "Thomas Pembroke himself, I should think," Holmes said. "With the governor's guidance and assistance, they chose a time when the guard rotations were predictable, when the substitute case was ready, when everything could be accomplished smoothly and without suspicion. Pemberton's legs seemed to give way beneath him. He sank down onto the stone floor, still clutching the Morocco case, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said, his voice choked. "Thomas came to me 6 months ago. He said he was being blackmailed, that he owed money to dangerous men who would ruin his family if he didn't pay. Caroline would be destroyed, Hartley's reputation shattered. I couldn't let that happen to my daughter's family." "So you agreed to help him steal a document that could threaten the Crown itself?" Holmes's voice was ice. Pemberton shook his head miserably. "I didn't know what the document was, not at first. Thomas said his creditors wanted something valuable from the vault, something they could hold as leverage against certain political figures. He swore no harm would come to anyone, that it would simply be insurance. By the time I discovered the truth, it was too late. I was already complicit." "And tonight?" Holmes pressed. "Why did Thomas summon you?" "His creditors demanded the treaty be returned, and whatever scheme they'd planned had failed, and now they wanted to distance themselves from the crime. Thomas was terrified. He begged me to put it back, to make everything disappear as if it had never happened." Holmes extended his hand. "Give me the case, Governor." Pemberton hesitated, then slowly handed over the red Morocco portfolio. Holmes opened it, examining the contents briefly before nodding with satisfaction. "The treaty appears intact. Watson, if you would be so kind as to signal Sir Reginald, I believe our other guests should be arriving shortly." Within minutes, the corridor filled with people. Sir Reginald arrived with Lord Ashford and Viscount Hartley, both bewildered by the late summons. Lestrade followed with 2 constables, and finally Thomas Pembroke was escorted in, his face ashen with dread. Yet when Pembroke saw his uncle sitting defeated on the vault floor, he let out a strangled cry and tried to run, but the constables seized him immediately. Holmes presented his evidence methodically, explaining the duplicate keys, the substituted case, the carefully orchestrated timing. Pemberton confessed fully, his voice hollow, while Thomas Pembroke wept and babbled about gambling debts and threats from foreign agents who had promised to erase his obligations in exchange for the treaty. "Foreign agents?" Sir Reginald repeated sharply. "Which nation?" "French monarchists," Holmes said, "hoping to use the treaty to destabilize the British government and support their own restoration efforts. A foolish dream, but dangerous nonetheless." As Lestrade led the 2 men away in chains, Viscount Hartley stood pale and shaken. "My God, Holmes! My own brother-in-law, my wife, will be devastated." "She will survive," Holmes said, not unkindly. "The scandal can be managed with discretion. The official story will be that 2 men attempted to rob the bank and were apprehended. The treaty need never be mentioned publicly." Later, back at Baker Street, I watched Holmes light his pipe and settle into his chair with evident satisfaction. "A remarkable case, Holmes. Your deduction about the duplicate keys was masterful." "Elementary, Watson. When the impossible is eliminated, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. The vault could not be opened without 3 keys. Therefore, someone created new keys. The only mystery was who and why." He picked up his violin and began to play, the case already forgotten, his mind turning toward whatever puzzle tomorrow might bring.